This is Emma, Victoria and Craig, and we're answering the question, as a consumer, does demand for ethical products have power on the decisions made in supply chains? Demand for ethical products is on the rise. In this day and age, there is no price premium on having a greener product. Nowadays, consumers expect it as the norm. In 2011, the value of the UK ethical market was £47.2 billion, and in 2013, the value of fair trade products in the UK was £1.78 billion. As a result, the demand for ethical products has started to shape company strategies. For example, Marks & Spencer's Plan A. As part of this strategy, they set out a list of 180 environmental commitments that included being a fairer partner within their supply chain.
The term ethical products covers an extensive list of issues and considerations that might impinge upon the purchase decision. Ethical consumption covers product safety, environmental impacts, consumer privacy, employee welfare, discrimination, fair pricing, community action, charitable donations, animal husbandry, and energy consumption. Examples of poor ethics include Shell, who as a global energy company have been subject to creating severe environmental impacts, in particular where oil spills are occurring along the coast of Nigeria, affecting local fishing and farming practices. Primark, who have had problems with employee welfare, where they have been scrutinised for crowded working conditions in sweatshop factories in poorer countries. Martin Shkreli, who has been analysed for hiking the price of a much-needed anti-malarial and anti-parasitic drug, Daraprim, by 5,556% overnight. And also the CIA, who have been criticised for their use of classified information and their access to private information of US citizens.
Moving on from this, we are now going to look at some theory, in particular sustainable supply chain management. This can be defined as the management of material, information and capital flows, as well as cooperation among companies along the supply chain, while taking goals from all three dimensions of sustainable development into account. These three dimensions being derived from customer and stakeholder requirements. These three dimensions are known as the triple bottom line. Elkington defines this as conceptualising the ways in which companies and other organisations create value in multiple dimensions, these three dimensions being economic prosperity, environmental quality and social justice. Organisations that concentrate on the triple bottom line will treat all three aspects equally and not focus solely on achieving economic prosperity.
In order for an organisation to achieve sustainable supply chain management, 5 characteristics must be met. These are orientation, continuity, collaboration, risk management and proactivity. Orientation involves the mindset of the company. It is essentially the culture of the organisation. There must be complete dedication to sustainable supply chain management and the triple bottom line from the top down, and it should be worked into the overall business strategy. Continuity refers to relationships within the supply chain. These relationships should be mutually beneficial and performance throughout the whole supply chain rather than each individual member is considered. Profits and risks are shared and there is a reasonable quality of life for each member of the supply chain. Collaboration again refers to all members within a supply chain. A key aspect is the idea of inter-organisational learning. Knowledge sharing is essential in order to achieve sustainable performance. Collaboration is a step up from simply coordinating with other members within the supply chain, and trust between members is essential. Risk management refers to the fact that certain standards are set and must be met by both suppliers and customers. This is due to the fact that sustainable products are at greater risk of a loss of reputation if something goes wrong. In order to manage this risk, transparency and good communication between members is essential.
The final component of sustainable supply chain management is the idea of proactivity. Investing in the development of sustainable products and services asks for innovation from within the supply chain. As a result, new markets and new customers can be reached, leading to gains in reputation and a setting of standards within the industry. Overall, the 5 components of sustainable supply chain management highlight the importance of relationships within the supply chain. All aspects of the triple bottom line are treated equally. However, the likelihood of most organisations carrying out all 5 aspects is unlikely. In particular, most organisations will take more of a reactive approach and make change only when necessary, rather than being proactive with their supply chain.
We are now going to examine 3 different case studies that, as consumers, we feel highlight whether or not demand for ethical products affects decisions made within the supply chain. The first case study we're going to look at is the garment industry, in particular the collapse of the Rana Plaza complex in Bangladesh. In April 2013, Rana Plaza, which housed a number of garment factories, collapsed, killing 1,134 people. At the time, Bangladesh suffered from a serious lack of regulation within the industry, and low wages made this attractive for organisations. Wages were so low that even though worker productivity increased in Bangladesh between 2001 and 2011, income actually fell. The typical wage was only 14% of the necessary living wage required to cover the basic needs of workers' families. As a result of the disaster, a number of measures were put in place to prevent a reoccurrence. Firstly, the Bangladesh Workers' Safety Initiative was signed by a number of high-profile organisations, mostly in the US, including Walmart, Target and Gap. This called for all member suppliers to be inspected within 1 year, the drawing up of common safety standards within 3 months, and to form worker committees in which safety concerns could be reported without fear of repercussions for workers. Although this seemed like a step in the right direction, it was highly criticised due to its non-binding nature and the fact that companies that signed up would not face punishment if they failed to stick to the initiative. The second initiative that was set up was the European Accord on Fire and Building Safety in Bangladesh. This was a legally binding initiative that required members to help bear the costs of repairing and upgrading factories in order to improve safety. Over 70 organisations signed up, including H&M and Tesco. Again, this was criticised, in particular by US retailers, for giving unions too much control and placing unlimited liability on the organisations involved. One of the organisations that was highly publicised as being involved with the Rana Plaza disaster was Primark. As a student, Primark is one of the go-to stores when shopping for clothes. The Rana Plaza disaster and Primark's involvement led me to question whether or not I should be purchasing from the store. On Primark's website, it states that since 2011, they have partnered with Business for Social Responsibility, local partners and suppliers on the Health Enables Return project, which provides healthcare and education for women working in the factories that make their products. Despite this, it is evident that Primark's concern for those workers within the supply chain was seriously lacking based on what happened at Rana Plaza. A YouGov poll following the collapse showed that the public's perception of Primark had plummeted as a result of this, and there was much talk of boycotting Primark following the collapse. However, despite this, sales figures from the months following the disaster show that it had no effect on people's decisions to shop there. In fact, sales figures actually increased by 20%. Although the disaster was highly publicised, Primark maintained demand by continuing with its keep it cheap, pile them high philosophy. This highlights the fact that although people expect ethical practices from organisations such as Primark, in the end what matters to people most, myself included, is the price that they pay for their clothing.
The second case study that we're going to look at is the story of the UK milk crisis. Issues within the UK began with the initial high demand of milk. In order to meet this demand for customers, farmers increased capabilities to take advantage of the profit with continuing investments into their business and capital. This excessive production provided extensive revenue whilst the customer desired the produce and allowed retailers to compete amongst themselves with the ability to alter prices according to the demand. Due to the high demand, drop prices did not cause too much disruption for the primary area of the supply chain as farmers. However, the persistent price drops began to cause concern for the long-term profit capabilities. With there being a supply and demand surplus, supermarket retailers compete in dropping prices of milk to keep sales up. With the retailers for milk being the dominant party in the transaction, they have the ability to control the market as the farmers need a sales outlet to the public to sell their mass produce. With the power imbalance between the buyer and supplier causing supermarkets to dictate the prices, farmers are forced to reduce profits to a minimum, often losing money in the process. With the UK customer base becoming more aware of the unethical transaction and the decline in dairy farmer capabilities, customers are beginning to call for fairer prices of milk to ensure the provision of milk in the public is kept safe and the supply chain is profitable for all rather than just the retailer. In retaliation to the public demanding a fairer and more ethical produce being sold from their supermarkets, many are using positive marketing strategies to gain back some trust within the supply chain and even the customers they have lost. However, this was seen as an ethical solution to an unethical problem, as multiple supermarkets had to be asked to partake in the improvement of supply chain conditions. In the case of Morrison's, accusations were even made that this token gesture was only made on a more expensive brand of milk within the market, only further increasing profits for the retailer and leaving the farmers no better off. A personal experience off the back of this product is that I've purchased this milk, considering the marketing ploy to be honest and fair. However, instead of providing the primary supplier with fairer share of the profit, I had only paid a greater amount to the supplying corporation. With milk being a necessity in many people's lives, one can argue that once the supplier receives the produce, the key consideration is the profit on a mass-purchased product. However, as a personal consumer, I do consider conditions when purchasing a contentious product. Prior to the milk scandals, many purchases were made with little consideration for the supplier. However, the increased news coverage has the power to impact individuals' opinions. Personally, I seek to purchase fairer or organic produce to ensure maximum equality throughout the supply chain. In regards to milk, the ideal would be to cut out the middle supplier altogether and only purchase from farms directly. If this option was accessible to me, then I try to do this. However, the option to visit individual traders is very infrequent and not achievable for many consumers who would wish to purchase their milk alongside their other products within a supermarket as part of their weekly shop. I will admit that this doesn't include myself. Unless I can have ethical milk delivered to my door through the use of other companies, I will often choose to purchase milk within a supermarket as and when is needed. In this case, I mostly only purchase that which is labelled organic, as a selfish consumer pleasure is received from this. Although it is often the more expensive option, it makes me feel better as a consumer than if I were to buy the cheapest option on the market.
The third case study we are going to look at is fair trade. The Fair Trade Foundation is a social organisation that commits to ensuring conditions for production and trade are socially fair and environmentally responsible. The Fair Trade organisation pre-finances producers in developing countries who require it, helping producers of crops that are used across the world to 50% ownership. Fair trade ensures a guaranteed minimum price, thus fixing prices to the producer so that a guaranteed price is received, regardless of supply and demand conditions at the time the product is delivered. A fair trade premium is provided which is invested in social, environmental and economic development projects. There is also a concentration on cooperatives, which is a collection of local farmers that work on one crop. This emphasises partnerships between trade partners and creates long-term trading relationships. However, there are problems associated with the fair trade label. The cooperative system is an intensification on the local environment. The local economy becomes dependent on the price of one specific product or raw material, and price falls have detrimental effects on the local economy and only hinders progress and development within the area. There is a loan scheme that helps farmers to buy more land. However, as more land is bought, it eats into the surrounding natural habitat. Cash crops grow and biodiversity is lost. As more land is brought, these farmers with more land also benefit greater, and the aim of social fairness is lost as it creates an income gap. There is also a gender gap, as work in countries such as Guatemala, Costa Rica and Uganda is run by the elder, religious men in the village, again drawing on the social responsibility of consumers when buying products. That's not to say what fair trade is doing is wrong. It is simply not an absolute solution, but a fairer trade alternative to other products. This is seen, however, with last year's fair trade seeing a drop of 4% in sales, reflecting consumers' reluctance to pay extra as cheaper alternatives are presented by chains such as Aldi and Lidl. Returning to the main question, it comes back to simply supply and demand. Where there is demand for a product or raw materials, companies will continue to supply said product and raw materials to each customer along the supply chain. From personal experience as a student, it is easy to be drawn into cheaper products with little income. It is hard to pay these premium prices when people are struggling to afford them. Their dependency is on the companies that provide the products.
In the wake of increasing ethical consciousness from the consumer, it is arguable that a culture is formed where it is in fact the consumer who has begun to dictate the market rather than the supplier. The primary and secondary stakeholders within the supply chain are forced to consider the demands of the consumer, arguably becoming more aware of ethical business, and so the roles are reversed. Christopher and Riles discuss the evolving culture of the demand chain due to the increasingly insatiable consumer base as technology and globalisation accelerates. However, from the issues outlined within this presentation, it is clear that the culture can also be applied in the ethical supply chain case.
This leads us to question whether do green products make us better people. Mazar and Zong suggest that exposure to green products leads to consumers behaving more selflessly in comparison to being exposed to conventional products. However, the drawback to their study is that purchasing greener products leads to consumers balancing their behaviour and become more likely to cheat and steal, suggesting that purchasing green products does not make us better people, as we legitimise our bad behaviour by claiming that we can't be bad people as we are ethically conscious.
In your experience, how much knowledge about the product does the downstream organisation or customer have, and how is this knowledge gained? In terms of the clothing industry, consumers have little knowledge of the products they purchase. Since the Rana Plaza disaster, there's been an increase in publicity in where clothes are sourced from, and further scandals involving Nike, for example, have only emphasised this further. However, in general, as a consumer, I personally have little knowledge of what I purchase and where it has come from. Although information about ethics can be found on companies' websites, most consumers are unlikely to look at this before purchasing items.
Where companies such as Fairtrade certify products with a label, they are doing the thinking for the consumer. In a globalised world, we simply cannot see every aspect of a company when we buy our clothes, milk or coffee from shops that operate on a global scale. When we see a label such as Fairtrade, we naturally assume that by buying that product, we are doing good and that there is nothing wrong with it.
Organisations selling produce are more than likely aware of the conditions at the beginning of the supply chain. However, profit is often the key, if not the only aim for many organisations. Unless a consumer intends to search deeper for an organisation's pledge to corporate social responsibility, they are also none the wiser.
Do you find Cox's framework applies to your experience as a consumer?
We believe that Cox's power matrix framework applies to the ethical supply chain. Using our case studies, we can see how supplier dominance is used by Primark as their produce is priced at a level which is unachievable for high street competitors. This makes them an obvious choice for us as student consumers with limited budgets. However, if we consider further back in the supply chain, Primark also holds buyer dominance, for if their primary resource becomes too expensive, they have the power to move elsewhere for a cheaper alternative and maximise profit. If we consider the milk crisis and the power matrix, there is an enormous amount of choice limited to a small price range due to the numerous competitive suppliers. We could consider this as market independence. However, if the producer and consumer, such as ourselves, are both ethically conscious, the milk supply chain and consumer fall into alliance, for there are few suppliers and relatively few buyers. Finally, if we look at our position with fair trade, we also feel this falls into the alliance category, with a small amount of buyers and suppliers, for there is limited or unique product on offer. Overall, we feel that Cox's framework applies to our consumer experiences as it categorises the relationships of power throughout the supply chain as explored through the examples in this presentation.
Thank you for watching our presentation on ethical products and the power on the decisions made in supply chains.